Man on the road. I hate driving at night. It's not the dark that bothers me, it's the quiet. The kind of silence that makes every little sound seem louder. Every creak, every thump, every whisper of wind feels like it's creeping inside the car with me. Last night I had to take the back roads home. It was late, almost 2 a.m., and the main highway was closed for construction. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't really have a choice, so there I was, cruising down this two-lane road in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but trees and fog. It was fine at first, uneventful even. The road was empty except for me. The only thing breaking the monotony was the occasional deer darting out into the edge of my headlights before disappearing into the woods. Then I saw him, a man standing on the side of the road. He wasn't walking, wasn't holding out his thumb, just standing there, staring at me. I slowed down, not enough to stop, just enough to get a better look. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and his clothes looked wet, like he'd been caught in the rain. His face was pale, his eyes too wide, and his mouth was off. I don't know how to explain it, but it looked like he was smiling, except his lips weren't moving. I drove past him, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than I realized. Something about him stuck with me, though, like a bad taste in my mouth. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him running after me, but he was gone. Or so I thought. A few minutes later, he was there again, standing on the side of the road in the exact same pose, same pale face, same wide eyes, same wrongness. My heart was pounding now. I didn't slow down this time. I just stared straight ahead, telling myself it was my imagination. I hadn't slept much. Maybe I was seeing things. But the third time, he was in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the car skidded to a stop. My headlights caught him in full view. His clothes were dripping now, water pooling around his bare feet on the asphalt. And his mouth was moving. Not like talking, not even like breathing. His lips stretched and twisted, his jaw opening wider and wider until it looked like his face was splitting in half. I couldn't hear anything over the pounding of my heart, but I could feel it, this horrible vibration, like he was screaming inside my head. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning as I tried to back away. But when I looked in the mirror, he was in the back seat. I don't remember much after that, just his hand reaching for me. Cold, wet fingers wrapping around my neck. I woke up in my car this morning, parked in a ditch on the side of the road. My phone was dead and I had no signal anyway. I don't know how long I was out, but the sun was already up. The strangest part, there wasn't a scratch on the car. No sign I'd crashed, no mud, no broken glass, but the back seat was wet. The wrong turn. I wasn't supposed to be on that road. The GPS was acting up and I missed my turn. Instead of rerouting me back to the highway, it sent me down this narrow, winding stretch of asphalt cutting through dense woods. I should have turned around, but I figured it was a shortcut. I just wanted to get home. The first sign that something was off was the fog. It came out of nowhere, thick and heavy, swallowing my headlights. The trees on either side of the road loomed like shadows, their branches clawing at the sky. Then I noticed the signs. The first one was small, faded, and barely legible. Slow down. A few minutes later, another. Turn back. My heart started to race. They didn't look official, just hand-painted wooden boards nailed to the trees. I tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to some local prank, but the air felt heavier with each mile. The third sign was different, bigger, painted in bold red letters. You're not alone. I eased off the gas and glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing but fog and shadows. The road seemed endless, stretching into the void. I was about to stop and turn around when something darted across the road ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching. My pulse thundered in my ears as I stared into the fog, searching for whatever it was. A deer, maybe? A raccoon? But the road was empty. Just as I started driving again, the radio crackled to life. It was static at first, then a faint, whispering voice. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but it sounded close, like someone was in the back seat. I reached over to turn it off, but the knob wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, until they filled the car. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, my foot pressing harder on the gas. And then I saw her, a woman standing in the middle of the road. Pale, with long black hair and a white dress that looked tattered and soaked. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. I swerved to avoid her, my car skidding onto the shoulder. When I looked back, she was gone. But the whispers didn't stop. I pressed forward, desperate to find the end of this cursed road, when the signs started again. Bigger now, bolder, screaming at me, "You can't leave. They're coming. Run." I didn't need any more encouragement. I floored it, the car roaring as it tore through the fog. The road felt like it was closing in, the trees leaning closer, their branches scraping against the roof. Finally, I saw lights ahead, bright, warm, and welcoming. The highway. I burst onto the main road, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. The fog evaporated and the whispers stopped. Relief washed over me as I sped toward home. But when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the car, I heard it again. The whispering. This time it wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the back seat. And as I turned, I saw her face in the mirror, smiling at me. The passenger. I drive for a rideshare company to make some extra cash. The hours are long, but the money's decent, especially when you get the late-night requests. You meet all kinds of people, some weird, some rude, some who won't stop talking. But last night was different. It was just after midnight when the request came in. The pickup was out by the edge of town, near the old industrial park. I hesitated. Rides out there always felt sketchy. But the app showed a generous tip, so I figured, why not? When I arrived, the area was deserted. The streetlights flickered, and most of the buildings were abandoned, their windows shattered. The pin on the app led me to a spot by a chain-link fence. Nobody was there. I waited a minute, drumming my fingers on the wheel. Just as I was about to cancel, there was a knock on the passenger side window. The guy was tall and thin, wearing a dark hoodie that shadowed most of his face. I couldn't see much of him, just pale skin and eyes that seemed to reflect more light than they should. He didn't say a word as he got in, just nodded in acknowledgement. "Where to?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, typing the address into the app. It was an hour away, out in the middle of nowhere. "All right," I said, pulling away from the curb. The first few minutes were quiet, went about too quiet. Most passengers either make small talk or scroll through their phones, but this guy just sat there, staring straight ahead. Every so often, I'd glance at him in the rearview mirror, and every time he was already looking at me. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take the silence anymore. "So, what brings you out this late?" I asked. "Nothing." He didn't even flinch. The road grew darker as we left the city behind. The headlights barely cut through the thick trees lining either side of the narrow road. That's when I noticed it. The clock on the dashboard wasn't moving. It still read 12 or 17, even though I'd been driving for nearly half an hour. My phone, which had been navigating, suddenly went dark. The music I had playing cut out, leaving only the hum of the tires on the road. Sir?" I said, my voice trembling. "I think my GPS is down. Do you know the way from here?" No response. I glanced in the mirror again, and my stomach dropped. He wasn't there. The passenger seat was empty. I swerved, nearly running off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I slammed on the brakes and looked around, but the car was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no way he could have left. That's when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, raspy breaths coming from the back seat. My hand shook as I reached for the mirror, tilting it down to see the back. He was there, not sitting this time, but crouched, his face inches from mine, his mouth stretched into a too-wide grin. "You shouldn't have picked me up," he whispered. The next thing I remember is waking up in my car, parked in the middle of the road. The passenger seat was empty, but there was something written on the window in fogged-up letters. "Thanks for the ride." I quit that night.